All right, everybody. Thank you for waiting patiently and joining us today for our last session of the MACAE Spring Institute. I hope that you've had a great time so far, and I hope that this last session will leave you just as excited as you were when you got here. My name's Heather. I'll be your host today for Lifting Michiganders Out of Poverty with Miss Kim Trent, Deputy Director of Prosperity. Just a couple housekeeping things really quickly. I'm sure that you've heard this many times, but sometimes it goes in one ear and out the other. So I just want to remind you that you can always get any information or updates from our MACAE website. Also, all the recordings and this presentation and any recordings or presentation that you've seen so far will be shared with you at the end of the conference. And lastly, make sure you check your email to submit those sketchy forms. If you're looking for those continuing clock hours for education, you can submit that after this session since it's the last session of the day. We do encourage you to turn on your camera if you can to make it feel more of a community, but I think that we're ready to go, and I'd like to introduce you to Kim Trent. As Deputy Director of Prosperity, she's charged with guiding and building supportive efforts to boost the economy and security of Michigan citizens through strategic initiatives, programming, and partnerships. Her portfolio of leadership duties in state government includes serving as the key staffer to the Michigan Poverty Taskforce. So I'm going to go ahead and let Kim take it away. You heard her, ladies and gentlemen. If you have questions, just go ahead and unmute, type it in the chat, whichever way you like to. All right. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Heather. And I appreciate your patience. I apologize again for being late. It was I actually just got finished speaking to my old receptionist. Well, she's still my receptionist as she works. She's promoted because she does a great job, or nearly. This is one where I think there might have been some mix-up, perhaps on my part. I always take blame because I should have probably checked in with her again earlier today. But I thought I was a little early, but turns out I was a little late. But I hope that you will find this presentation useful. I know it's the end of the day. Sometimes it's hard to get pumped up for those end of the day presentations. So I hope that I'm able to fill the bill for you. As was mentioned, I am the key staffer to the Michigan Poverty Taskforce, which was convened by Governor Whitmer in December of 2019. I started my work with the state of Michigan in the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity the next month. And then, as you know, 2 months later, COVID started. And so just to give you a sense of kind of what happened from the launch of the Poverty Task Force until today, Governor Whitmer, in the way that she designed the Poverty Task Force, it has 14 state department directors at the table. And the reason that she designed it that way is we recognize that poverty is not just in the purview of the State Department of Health and Human Services, or just in the purview of my department, Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. Although a lot of times when people think about it, they think that we're the only agencies that have kind of an anti-poverty mission. Really, it should be within the goals of every State Department to do its part. And so we think that poverty is multidimensional. It has many causes, and it has many solutions, or many approaches to addressing the poverty in our state. And so our task force was convened then. Governor Whitmer also convened a 6-member Poverty Task Force Advisory Council, which came together in just a few months later. And we organized our work around work groups, and I'll tell you about that a little bit more as I go through the presentation. But I want to kind of talk a little bit about why we're doing what we're doing. 1.4 million Michiganders are living in poverty, which that's by the very strict definition of poverty that the federal government uses, which by most standards, if most people saw what the numbers represented, that would be something even beyond poverty. It would be a level of income that most people couldn't dream of living with. We have set as our goal not just the federal poverty line, but what we call ALICE, or what it actually is more accurately described by the United Ways, because that's their acronym, and ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. In other words, people who go to work every day, who have families, who are doing their best, but still are not able to make ends meet. So that population has grown, even though actually Michigan's poverty rate, when we look at it from a federal poverty line, has actually decreased. The rate of ALICE, people who are the working poor, has increased. And we just have too many people. Right now, our ALICE rate for the state of Michigan is 38%, which we think is way too high. You're looking at almost 40% of our population is struggling. And obviously that is not sustainable. So I think I have my slides a little out of order. So our goals for the Michigan Poverty Taskforce, first of all, to reduce that ALICE population, as I mentioned, to do it using collaborative and interdepartmental programs. Again, we don't want to be siloed in this work. We recognize that we need to use all the tools in our toolbox, which includes the Michigan State Police, Department of Corrections, obviously DHHS, LEO, our Department of Insurance and Financial, our Department of EGLE, which is our department that handles environmental issues. Every department has a place at the table. So we want to be very much collaborative about it. And then we use as a frame for our work a commitment to racial equity in state government, particularly in the Whitmer administration. That has been a goal in every state department, and something that is really kind of a North Star value for us. One thing that Governor Whitmer did when she took office was that very shortly after she took office, she appointed a state equity and inclusion officer, and every state department has an equity and inclusion officer, and that happens to be me for the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. So for our report for last year, this is our second report, will be coming out very shortly. Fingers crossed. We believe it's in the governor's office right now for review. If you could just hold a second. I just realized my plug has just popped out, so I want to make sure I don't lose you mid conversation. There we go. But the Department of our first set of recommendations came out in February of 2021. We had 35 policy recommendations that we made. They were organized around several work groups, and again, the work groups were collaborative. We had several departments at the table, and we organized around benefits, economics, education, criminal justice, and health, safety, and housing. So that's how we organized our first report. Our work groups met for 6 months. They did almost kind of an inventory review of what programs we already had in place, what among them, which ones were effective and worked. And one thing I want to make clear is for our first report, a lot of the focus was about our safety net or lack thereof. We really analyzed whether the state of Michigan in some ways has some of the most draconian rules as it relates to who can get federal benefits for things like shelter, food, and we have very limited cash benefits available. And there has been a tremendous amount of research that shows the effectiveness of cash benefits. And I think there's probably no better research than what we just experienced during the COVID-19 crisis, when we saw child tax credits and other benefits that people were able to get, and people used that money to pay their bills. We saw the economy really kind of roar back, even in the midst of a global pandemic. So we think that there's a lot of evidence that a lot of the stereotypes that people have about people who live in poverty and who rely on benefits did not really bear out during this last crisis. So for our most recent report, which has not come out yet, you're getting a bit of a sneak preview. It's going to be coming out. I'm hoping by the end of this month, we'll have it on the street. It looks at the work that we do through the lens of social determinants of health. And we thought that that was really important, given what we saw during the COVID-19 crisis. We saw that there were racial disparities that emerged, certainly economic disparities, where we really recognize that things like income really do affect your health. And so we have 29 recommendations. I should mention from the last report, as I mentioned, we had 35 recommendations. We have 14 of those recommendations that have either been adopted or are very much on their way to adoption. We feel very optimistic that we, from that first report, we've got about 14 that we know, that we feel have a very, either are already in play, and I'll tell you about some of those in a moment, or are very close. And so this time we organized our report around, again, these social determinants of health as articulated by the World Health Organization. Obviously, different entities have different definitions about what the social determinants of health are. They're pretty much any dimension of life that you can think about, from income to education. Unemployment is obviously a huge factor in health. Food insecurity. We know that there has been, the governor actually convened a food policy council here in the state of Michigan. That was really, the goal was to ensure that we had a strategy to deal with food insecurity in our state. And so there's an element of that in our report as well. Early childhood development, housing. For the first time in Michigan history, MISHDA is now leading a statewide effort to create a statewide housing plan, which, I mean, I was actually quite shocked to find out there's never been one before, but there is this effort, and it's not just something that MISHDA is doing in a vacuum. They have brought in a number of partners from outside of state government. Several state government partners are at the table as well, to really try to figure out how can we address housing insecurity. I can tell you, since I've been in this position with the Poverty Task Force, no matter what group I talk to, almost every time I've spoken, people have raised housing insecurity as a major issue here in the state. And it's not just a major issue in our big cities. I have been, all over the state talking about this, and even in some of our wealthier communities, in fact, especially in some of our wealthy communities, the people who need to power those communities, so the people who work in restaurants and the people who pick up garbage and the people who are frontliners in those communities, cannot afford housing in those communities. And so in those areas where there's not adequate transportation, it's a real problem. And so we recognize there has to be a really intentional effort to address housing insecurity in our state. Early childhood development is something that is very important, particularly to the Whitmer administration, and it's something that we really lifted up in our Poverty Task Force as being very important. And as you may know, we just had some rule changes for our availability of early childhood education in our state, that has allowed people who earn slightly more than what was previously allowed, are now able to have their children receive early childhood education at no cost. And so it's a huge investment in early childhood education, and there has been ample evidence of what that means for down the road for those students. Health services, again, I actually was involved with the Coronavirus 19 Racial Disparities Task Force that the governor convened, and we know that there are some communities that simply have a real scarcity of health services, and when those communities also have issues with transportation, issues with income, you end up having really serious health outcomes, health disparities and health outcomes that are not ideal. And so those are the kind of things that we're looking at as we pull together our 2022 Poverty Task Force report. I want to talk to you about one of the proposals that we are especially passionate about. that we had in the last report, but we put it in a special category in our last report called things we would do if we had more money, because we knew that it was going to be very difficult to talk about it again going into the 2021 report came out before COVID. And so none of us could have really known let me back up. The 2021 report came out before we knew that there was going to be serious relief for COVID through things like the ARPA and other relief that we got. And then we also saw that our economy was a little stronger in Michigan than we had anticipated. But at the time, there was such uncertainty when our report came out in February of 2021. There was such uncertainty about what our financial future in the short term looked like. And we thought that it was probably unrealistic to ask for an increase in the state's match to the earned income tax credit. We thought at the time that although it was something that we very much believed in, we didn't think that there was a political will for it. So I'm happy to report that a year later, we've seen a complete reversal of fortune there. We've seen that people have stepped up. There's bipartisan support in the legislature. Organizations like the Michigan Manufacturers Association, the Restaurant Association, a number of employers have stepped forward to say that there should be an expansion of Michigan's earned income tax credit. And just that one action, our goal for Leo, one of our goals is to lift 100,000 Michigan families out of poverty. And if we do that one action of boosting the earned income tax credit from right now it's at 6%, which is so minimal. What we're saying is that it needs to be boosted to at least 20% of the federal tax credit. And so, which was what it was. In fact, when we first adopted when the state of Michigan first adopted the earned income tax credit, our version of it, it was 20% of the federal earned income tax credit. And in 2011, then Governor Rick Snyder and the legislature did decrease it down to 6%. It is a proven strategy. First of all, it incentivizes work, which is something that I think all, particularly given where we are, where there is a worker shortage in our state right now, it's something certainly that we think is a good thing for both employers and employees. And there's just so much proof, so much research that shows that having that breathing room, having an kind of influx of cash in that way helps families have a little bit more economic stability, so that one problem, like if you have a car that needs repair, it doesn't send you into a tailspin because you do have some resources. We're really very optimistic. And then there's also evidence that health outcomes are better for people who have access to that earned income tax credit. It's really something that's a proven strategy. So that's something that we're really pushing for. And we think in the 2023, fiscal year 2023 budget, we're going to see a boost to the earned income tax credit. In fact, the legislative proposal actually even calls for a higher number than what the governor has proposed. We think that there will be some negotiation, but we really think that that's something that's going to be very beneficial for our particularly for the ALICE population, those families that are working but are just not making enough to regularly be able to pay all of their bills. And so we have a number of recommendations in the last report that so that was one that we had, that we feel that there's some momentum. Another one is a proposal that we have when I talked about housing. One population that really has a tough time finding housing often is justice involved individuals, people who are perhaps returning from incarceration. There is a program with our Michigan Department of Corrections. It's a partnership between them and MISTA that gives vouchers to returning citizens so they can find housing. But it's been slow going in trying to get them to, trying to get landlords to participate. So we're thinking about some incentives. How can we get more people into that program so that, because we know that when justice involved individuals have safe, reliable, and safe and housing, they are less likely to recidivate. We know that it's good for the entire community. So we want to make sure that we get support for that program. We did actually see an increase in the number of vouchers that were available. We've been stymied a bit by the lack of interest in some cases from some landlord. We're trying to come up with some strategies to get more landlords involved with that. For this year's report, one of the things that we're proposing, one of the things we had in our report last year, I should say, and then I can tell you how we changed it a little bit this year. We had a proposal, the way that the state operates now, if you are a custodial parent and you receive benefits from the state of Michigan through the federal government, the way things work now, if the non-custodial parent is paying child support, any money that the state provides for that family, if the custodial parent receives benefits, the state is reimbursed first instead of the money going to the child. So we said there should be a pass-through so that if a non-custodial parent is paying child support, that money should go to the child. One way that we thought that we could get there so that more of those dollars go directly to the child in those kind of cases, one of the things that we were successful for with last year was getting funding to expand children's savings accounts, which is something we're very excited about. Children's savings accounts are programs that are usually partnerships between banking organizations, nonprofits. A lot of times schools are involved, and the idea is to work with families when children are very young, so that they're seeding accounts, and then the community is also putting money into individual accounts for these children so that by the time they go to college, they do have some money saved up for college. And there's a lot of research that shows that even if they don't have enough money to actually pay for a total tuition, it creates a college going mindset for those families. And so it has been a very successful tool to help boost college going in our communities. And to also it adds to the economic stability of those families. And so right now there are 15 communities in Michigan that have children's savings account programs. We want to expand that out as much as we can. And so we were able to get an appropriation for $1 million to set up a statewide infrastructure so that if other communities want to stand up CSA programs, we can provide technical assistance. We could give them kind of the tools that they need to be successful. And we really want Michigan to be, right now in the state of California, most children have children's savings accounts because the state has invested a tremendous amount of money into that infrastructure. We want to make sure, we know that we will likely not have that kind of investment here in Michigan, but we want to give communities some incentives to start them kind of back at home. And so that's something that we're really excited about. And what we're hoping to do is for those non-custodial parents who may be behind in their child support, instead of the state penalizing them for their arrearage and taking that money, we would say, if you set up a children's savings account for your child through one of these programs, we would forgive those arrearages and that money could just go to your child. So I'm just trying to be really innovative about how we approach benefits in our state. We recognize that those are political decisions that have to be made, but we think that there's some ways that we can be really innovative and make sure that particularly children don't fall into poverty if we can use kind of the tools that we have at our disposal, particularly federal tools, to prevent that. And so it looks like Heather's trying to get my attention. I know I've been talking for a long time. I have no idea what time it is. So if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm really excited about the report. As I mentioned, it should be out any day now, and I can make sure that you all have access to it. It will be on our Poverty Taskforce website, but I'll make sure that Heather has it, and perhaps we can make sure you get copies of them. it'll be virtual, so it's something you can read online.
Thanks, Kim. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know, and I wasn't sure if you still needed the screen share or not, but a couple minutes ago it went blank. So, okay, so we could take that down. And there actually was a question in the chat too, is a child's bank account protected if the parents have a judgment against them? A court has to order to take the money that is owed out of the child's bank account?
I mean, the idea would be that these accounts would be protected. That's a big part of what we think is a benefit of this program, so that children don't have to, but it's important to note that we have two different ways that this would work. One is a way where the state could forgive their portion of the arrearage. If the custodial parent also forgives the arrearage, then that money could go in there and it would be protected, so that it's going to again, for post-secondary education for that child. So yeah, that's one of the things that we're really excited. And then I didn't even get a chance, but I want to just quickly mention Reconnect and Futures for Frontliners, which are two really important programs that are in my portfolio that give students who are over the age, that Reconnect any Michigander who's over the age of 25 and does not have a college degree, who's Pell eligible, will be able to go to get a 2-year certificate or get a 2-year degree or a certificate for in-demand jobs for free without tuition. The state is investing in that because we recognize how important talent is. People talk about what attracts businesses to the state, and we know talent is a huge part of that. And I know that adult learners who might have some hesitancy about returning to school to get that post-secondary credential, this is one program that we think is, and by the way, we recognize, I used to serve on the Wayne State University board, so I know that it's not just about tuition. There's the wraparound services that are incredibly important, so that people, if they need transportation, if they need childcare, if they just need someone to hold their hands. We have navigators that work very closely with our students who are in the Reconnect plan, to ensure that they finish their degree, or their certificate, because it's not a success when we say right now we had 91,000 people who, 94, I believe, thousand people who signed up for Reconnect. We have about 16,000 who are actually actively in school right now. We want to get as many of those people who signed up into a program, and most importantly, we want to get them out of the program with a credential. We think it's really important for our state's future. I don't know if there are other questions. See,
I just see there's another question, but oh, sorry. But Cheryl said poverty in Michigan is a universal problem and must be addressed with adequate economic solutions. Good to hear we're making inroads regarding this topic.
Yes, thank you, Cheryl. That's true, and we really are trying to look at it from all angles. That again, that's why I think we have 14 state departments at the table. We recognize transportation. There are areas. One that comes to mind right away is Traverse City, which is a very prosperous in some ways community, but those folks, when you go up and play when you're gambling in the casino or you're going out to have a nice meal, a lot of the people who are working with you there are not able to afford to live in Traverse City. So how do we get them quality housing, get them the transport, and they don't really have the transportation options that are necessary to get people. So people live often really far away, and then they have to find a way into Traverse City. And so this is not a problem that's just for our urban centers. It's a problem all over our state. And so we really want to be very intentional about having everyone at the table to kind of try to come up with solutions. And I see the question about how to get more information about children's bank accounts. I'm going to put in the chat the web address for the Poverty Task Force, because we have information about the children's savings accounts there. But I will tell you another way you can get information, and this is probably a better way because they have a better website because they've been doing this longer, is CEDM. CEDM we actually gave the contract to CEDM, and that's Community Economic Development Association of Michigan. I believe, association. I always get that A wrong. So, but if you, I'm sure many of you know CDM. They're headquartered right here in Lansing, and they have been at the table with us throughout this whole process of trying to expand the availability of children's savings accounts. They are very, very knowledgeable about it. And again, they are leading our effort to set up statewide infrastructure. So while you can get information from our website, CDM's website is probably even a better source.
I think I just plugged your website in there for you.
Thank you.
There.
I appreciate
Kim,
that.
I'll see if I can find CDM too. So if there's
Okay.
other questions, go ahead and just unmute and ask a question or pop it in the chat.
I see a question for Whitney. It's not really a question, but a statement about no options in Northeast Michigan. And, you know, I can tell you, I'm glad that you mentioned about, because I think that, again, you know, I've said this a few times, this is not an urban, poverty is not an urban problem. And I know that those of you who are on this call know that. But one of the things that I recently had a very interesting panel discussion with a person who lived in Northeast Michigan who was saying, well, I have my fingers crossed today that I'm going to continue to have internet service. And so one of the things that we're also hoping to do, one of the things that was in the Poverty Task Force last time was a proposal to really expand broadband access for our state. And we know that because of the infrastructure bill that Congress passed a few months ago, the state of Michigan is going to get significant dollars to really address those communities that don't have access to the internet. And I know that for some people that seems unlikely that you could be in 2022 and not have access to the internet, but there are a lot of communities. Yeah, right, so there you go, Heather, right. So you know that this is not a myth. This is something that is a huge impediment to economic mobility because, you know, the internet is how we do things in the 21st century. So we want to make sure that, so we're going to be working, part of the Poverty Task Force, we actually got some money in our last budget to help local communities come up with a playbook to help them as they get these federal dollars in, so that they use them in a way where they can really have impact quickly. Because we feel like we're in some cases already behind. And you know, when we talk about haves and have-nots for school systems, those people, those schools that don't really have communities where there's a high concentration of broadband access are behind. I mean, they're just not going to have the same economic or educational access and success that other communities will have. So I'm sorry, I'm looking and seeing for some reason it's saying my battery is running low.
Kim, it just seems like that's kind of par for the way that this afternoon's going, but it's good. It's all good.
I'm not doing well today, but that's okay. We're all set now. So I think I'm
yeah. Were there any more questions? I did see a few more comments popping up. You know, yeah, the internet is a huge issue. And oh, there was a question. I'm sorry. Let me go back just a smidge. Is the child's bank account a custodial account? Was another question, kind of going back a little onto the bank account question.
Yes, I mean, well, that's the thing. The reason we decentralized this and didn't make it, well, there's a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is every community that sets up their own CSA program will have its own rules. But ordinarily, yes, it would be something that the parent who is custodial would actually have access to the account, but they would only be able to take out money from the account for very limited purposes. So it's not as if you could just say, well, I think I want to take a trip to Bermuda. Let me take out, you know, a couple of $1,000. You know, the money would have to be used for educational purpose. Some communities might decide that they want people to be able to use it for extracurricular activities for K-12 students. We know a lot of communities now, it's like pay or play. If you pay to play, if you're not, you know, if you can't afford it, particularly ironically, these communities that are low income, a lot of times are the ones where people have to pay more for the programs because they're not available. So what we're trying to do is equalize those opportunities too, because then you could use that money. And again, the important thing about these CSA programs is that you have community investment. So of course, parents are going to invest some percentage of what goes into the accounts, but we're not callous about the fact that some people, as much as they would love to save for their child's education, they simply can't afford to do it. They just don't have that extra money. So it's important for people to know that when you sign up, yes, we would look for you to invest some, but then the idea is that the community would come around. And so community foundations often run these CSA programs. A lot of times it's actually the school system will have a CSA program. We have a lot of different iterations of how it's done in our state, but we have seen tremendous tremendous success from those programs that already exist, but we think we're going to see a lot of innovation with this infrastructure that CDM is working with us to set up right now.
Thank you. And I think Christian has a hand up, has been waiting patiently. So go ahead, unmute yourself if you want, Christian.
I'm already unmuted. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Hello,
Yes,
Yes,
yep,
we can.
go
Thank
ahead.
you.
All right. So one question I had is when you mentioned the Futures for Frontliners program. Now, I had gotten some information like maybe in the beginning of last year that the schooling would be initially free, but then from what I understood, the training programs of the community colleges will be looking at some of the providers to cover the cost of tuition for that student later on down the line. And I think
no, the way it's designed, it's a last dollar scholarship. So, for students who, are already eligible for Pell and eligible for maybe some other incentives that we have, those would kick in, and then the state will provide the last dollars to make sure that they have enough. But anyone who's accepted into the Futures for Frontliners program, by now you would have had to have signed up because it was, obviously a limited amount of time for that particular program. It was designed for people who were the very first people, we know those of us who had the luxury of working from home early on in the pandemic. There were many of us who didn't, who had to go and clean and deliver food at hospitals, or who had to stock the grocery shelves and grocery stores and that kind of thing. That work never ended. And so those folks who were working in those kind of jobs and want to have some economic mobility by going back and getting a credential, we said it's almost like a GI Bill for those workers who were on the front lines of the COVID-19 crisis. But anyone who is accepted to that program, their tuition will be free. It's not something that's going to be. It's phased out. The availability of the program is phased out because obviously that was for a finite amount of time for people who worked for a finite amount of time. So it's really for people who just at the beginning of the pandemic were doing those jobs. And by those jobs, I mean practically any job. If you were working during that time and you don't have that credential, you don't have a college degree, you were eligible for Futures for Frontliners. We did already pass the deadline for enrollment, but if anyone who's enrolled is eligible for free tuition.
all right. Thank
you. Sure.
Any other questions out there, comments? Oh, okay. Here's a question from the chat, Kim. Going kind of back to the internet, the technological divide, right? What programs and funding are available for digital equipment for those in need?
That's a really great question. And one of the things that the governor proposed in for dollars from ARPA to be used for is to establish a high-speed internet office for the state of Michigan. And that is something that still has not, we used to have a budget season in state government. Now it just seems like that's all your thing. So particularly because we have just the regular budget, then we have a supplemental, and now we have ARPA dollars. So budget negotiations are just ongoing. And so that was one thing that we really want to do. We really want to established so that we have, that long-term strategy. And part of that strategy would be providing the equipment, because we know, particularly I live in Detroit, and here in Detroit, when the schools went virtual, it was a disaster for us. In the beginning, we were very concerned about how students who had no access to internet and no equipment, even if they had access to internet, and the community did step up and provide, they were able to, I say they, I mean the community leaders partnered with some of the philanthropic community and other corporate entities, and they were able to get that equipment. But a long-term strategy to make sure that that continues and that everyone has equal access is something that we want to actually have a separate department in state government that will be dealing with those kind of questions. And right now that's kind of on hold. But it's something that we think is a high priority.
You're muted,
Affordable
Heather.
transport. Heather, I think are you speaking, Heather? You're muted.
Yeah, I did mute myself, and then somebody else unmuted and said something. Heather, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Hey, don't worry.
Yeah, I put it in the chat, but I was curious if any of the program providers maybe have like a My Bridges navigator on site. It's something that I've been thinking about getting trained to do, so that we're just like right there on site for the folks. And no one does that in our area, so I don't know what the logistics of what that looks like, but I just wanted to kind of throw that ask out to get feedback.
I can tell, I don't know about your colleagues here, but I can tell you that right now in Leo, Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, we like our acronyms in state government. We are right now doing our strategic planning. And one thing that has come up time and time again is the need to have more collaboration and better understanding, cross-departmental understanding, particularly as it relates to My Bridges, because we touch so many, with unemployment, the Unemployment Insurance Agency is in Leo. There needs to be better collaboration between us and My Bridges and other entities. So I can tell you in state government, we're very sensitive to the need of having those, navigators and people who can help folks get, kind of locked into the support that we can give them. One thing I meant to mention earlier when I was talking about Reconnect and Futures for Frontliners, the governor in her budget put in $15 million for wraparound services for those programs. And we have navigators who are helping those students so that if they have a need with food security, we're getting them, into the right programs. If they have a need for housing, we're trying to work with Michigan to make sure that they have adequate housing. So, just trying to be really intentional about giving our students those wraparound services they need so that they have the headspace to go to school. I mean, if you're worried about whether your family's going to eat that night, school is just not going to be a high priority for you as much as you would like to go back and get a credential. So, and we recognize that, and we're trying to solve for that problem. But I think that it's admirable that you're thinking about being trained for that, because it is really, those programs are really helpful, but they're only helpful if people know about them and know how to access them.
Yeah, I'd like to second that, what Kim said, Heather, because honestly, I feel like a lot of times if it's hard for me to keep track of where I need to go or who I need to talk to or what entity I need to deal with for this, then I know that the people we're serving are going to have a difficult time keeping track of where to go for what and who to talk to for what.
Correct.
So there was another question that popped up in the chat as well, and you did kind of address it a little bit, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about how the Poverty Task Force is addressing the problem of the affordable transportation. Says difficult for families to go anywhere, including getting to work on time, and the the public transportation that we have, which maybe wasn't the best to start with, is also just drastically different now because of COVID and trying to make sure everything is operating safety first kind of situation. So could you speak to that a little bit, please, Kim?
It is such a huge need and such a very difficult problem, because you have to have local communities have some degree of buy-in, and there's some communities that aren't interested. Even when they have dollars or have dollars available, they're not interested in public transportation for whatever reason, options, I should say. We have been working with MDOT. MDOT is at our table. One of the proposals we had in this year's Poverty Taskforce report, the one that's coming out, I'll give you a sneak preview, is to develop a card where people could easily transfer from different forms of transportation. So if you needed to, if your city doesn't have public transportation, a bus system or something, there might be other private transportation options that we might be able to have a card that we give to low-income Michiganders so that they have more access to transportation options. This is just an idea at this point, but it's something that we're trying to be really innovative in the way that we approach it, because it is true that a lot of times our public transportation systems are woefully inadequate, and it really hurts people who are trying to get to work, trying to get their kids to school. In fact, one of the things we wrote about in our last report is that the way that our benefit system is set up in Michigan, if your kid is truant, and truant is not just missing school, but it's being late for school too. If you're late a certain number of times, then your family actually has dollars taken away from it with their benefits. So, which is so counterproductive, because if you're a person living in poverty who doesn't have reliable transportation, your kid is going to be late to school sometimes. Your kid is probably going to miss school a lot. And instead of causing the root problem, it just penalizes people for their poverty. And so, we try to kind of lift that up as a problem. At the very least, don't penalize, or let's try to figure out how we incentivize people getting there on time. Meaning, do we set up rideshare? Do we set up some kind of system in place so that we can get kids there on time, instead of just saying, if you don't get your kids there, we're going to take the limited resources you have from the state government away from you. To me, it makes absolutely no sense. So that was one of the proposals we had in our last report. I'm sorry to report absolutely nothing happened with it, but we're going to keep trying. One of the things that we did get money for is a study that the University of Kansas, we just awarded a contract to the University of Kansas to study how our TANF dollars are distributed at the state, as a state. Spoiler alert, not well. Only 19% of the dollars that come in for TANF actually get to intended recipients. We have a lot of some well-meaning programs that don't really have anything to do with poverty eradication. And so we're trying to be, they're doing the study, and we're hoping that it will be a case building exercise for us so that we can, at some point, convince the legislature to change the way we offer benefits in our state. So that is our goal with the Poverty Task Force.
Thank you for addressing that question. Are there any other questions? It looks like we're winding down for our last minute or so here. So if you have any other questions while we've got Kim on here, please go ahead and ask away.
It's the end of the day, so I totally get it.
Yeah, hearing crickets, I'm thinking the same thing. But you just gave us a lot of information, and I think we'll all be excited to see when the report comes out and really have that to work with. But I want to second, somebody earlier in the chat had said something just about, thank you for all your hard work on this, and thank you for thinking about this problem as a problem that it spans much more than what we traditionally might think, right? And so by bringing all of these different entities and parts of the state government to the table, I think we're on the right track, thinking that we can't just look one siloed way to solve such a big a big problem. But, and going back to the numbers you said in the beginning, I mean, it's a substantial amount of our population. So we really need to be working on this.
Well, I really appreciate your giving me this opportunity to share some of our work. I'm really excited about the new report that's coming out, and happy to, if any of you want me to come in to present to an organization that you're affiliated with, I'm happy to present once we have our new report out. And again, thank you so much for giving me the platform opportunity to share with you today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing with MACAE. Thank you all for joining us. It's Friday. So you know what? Don't forget to submit your sketchy forms if you need them. But I think we all are ready to have a great weekend. So thanks so much. We'll see you all soon.